there, and happy Tuesday, February 27th. I am your host, Pete Dominic. This is Stand Up, and I've got a great guest joining me today. It's Dr. Jason Johnson back on the show from Morgan State University, MSNBC, and the host of Slate podcast, A Word with Jason Johnson. Awesome conversation with Jason, who has gotten into a bit of an argument with a very well-known hip-hop artist and activist, Killer Mike, who called him out, misunderstood something that Jason said on TV, and Jason gets into it and explains it. It's a really great conversation. I think that you will love, as always, anytime he's on here with me. It starts at 21 minutes in, or the wind-up at least does, for my conversation with Jason. 21 minutes. Before I get the headlines, just a reminder that we are getting very close to Las Vegas, under a month away. You can still join us. Get tickets to PodJam, comedy, music, podcast tapings, and more. Jared Yates Sexton is going to join us. John Carroll, Christian Finnegan, Ophira Eisenberg, and J.L. Covan, who was on the show yesterday. The great Garrett Sever of Buckets and Boards, and so many of you that are coming. I cannot wait. Very, very exciting. Counting down the days before I see you at PodJam in Vegas. Now it's time to get to your headlines. And remember, I can't do any of it without you. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic now. Let's see. What do we have for you? Leading off the day, I think it's got to be that Hungary's parliament overwhelmingly approved Sweden's bid to join NATO yesterday, clearing the way for the Nordic nations' accession to the alliance after nearly 2 years of intense negotiations and dealing a geopolitical blow to Russian President Vladimir Putin, is how CNN puts it. Getting approval from the Hungarian parliament was the final hurdle for Stockholm joining NATO. Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson visited Budapest, that's how that's pronounced, last Friday to discuss defense and security cooperation with his Hungarian counterpart Viktor Orban. The two sides appeared to reconcile, agreeing on a deal that would see Hungary acquire 4 new Swedish-made Gripen fighter jets. Gripen. I don't know. But I didn't even know that they had their own fighter jets. I'm going to go look them up. Also, let's go to the Supreme Court yesterday that heard the complicated arguments in a pair of cases that could fundamentally change discourse on the internet by defining for the first time what rights social media companies have to limit what their users can post. Adam Lichtak, writing at the New York Times, the court's decision expected by June will almost certainly be its most important statement on the scope of the First Amendment in the internet era, and it will have major political and economic implications. A ruling that tech platforms like Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok have no editorial discretion to decide what posts to allow would expose users to a greater variety of viewpoints, but almost certainly amplify the ugliest aspects of the digital age, including hate speech and disinformation. Lot to react to those arguments. I haven't read into it very much. It's complicated. I'll talk with Siegel and more about that one. But speaking of the Supreme Court, did you hear that Justice Clarence Thomas recently hired a law clerk who's previously accused of sending racist text messages? Her name is Crystal Clanton, and she begins clerking for the justice in the upcoming term. I think I probably should have told you on that in yesterday's news, but at this point, hopefully you've heard about that. Siegel's head exploded, and we'll talk with him about it. The disgraced former president Donald Trump on Monday filed a notice of appeal to the New York civil judgment finding him liable for fraudulently inflating his net worth on years of financial statements. The legal challenge comes less than 2 weeks after Judge Arthur Engoron ordered Trump to pay more than $450 million in fines and interest for his fraudulent business practices, and I think he's going to have to put the money up, some of the money at least, up if he is appealing, is what I read yesterday. Also, it's pretty funny and interesting that the Attorney General of New York, Letitia James, every day is tweeting the amount of interest that he has to pay. It's like hundreds of thousands of dollars a day on this huge fine. And more about the disgraced former president's legal problems. Manhattan prosecutors yesterday asked the judge overseeing the criminal case against him to prohibit the former president from attacking witnesses or exposing jurors' identities. The requests made in filings by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office noted Mr. Trump's long-standing history of attacking witnesses, investigators, prosecutors, judges, and others involved in legal proceedings against him. Seems like a reasonable request to me. We'll see if it's granted. And now talks are in place to persuade Mitch McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader, to be wheeled out and endorse Donald Trump, even though you know he hates him, and even though apparently they haven't spoken in 4 years. More on politics. House Democrats are considering long-shot maneuvers to force a vote on a Ukrainian aid bill, but there's dissent over its funding for Israel. And speaking of the Middle East, Palestinian civilians sheltering in the city of Rafah will be allowed to flee to other areas of southern Gaza before an Israeli attack. Oh, how kind of them. But will not be allowed to return to their homes. In the northern part of the Gaza Strip, 2 Israeli officials told NBC News on Monday. And a horrible scene of sacrifice at the Israeli embassy in Washington, where yesterday an active-duty U.S. airman set himself on fire in protest of civilian deaths in Gaza. He died of his injuries on Sunday night. His name is Aaron Bushnell. He's 25 years old, of San Antonio, and he appeared to have filmed the protest on Sunday, live streamed it on social media platform Twitch, and his name was trending all day yesterday. And don't watch it. I watched it, and they blur it out as soon as he sets himself on fire, but it's just absolutely horrific. And I don't know what kind of mental state you have to be in that. I don't know if it's a sign of ultimate courage, but man, what a thing. And I just don't know what else to say about it. Let's move on to the next headline, which is that the Federal Trade Commission yesterday sued to block the $25 billion deal between Kroger and Albertsons. I've never even heard of Albertsons. Where are they? Alleging the largest supermarket merger in U.S. history would lead to higher prices for consumers. So thank you to the United States federal government at the FTC for blocking that. I wanted that blocked. I don't know what I'm talking about, but the merger, which was announced 2 years ago, sought to combine the 5th and 10th largest retailers in the country. Companies own dozens of chains, including Safeway, Vons, Harris Teeter, and Fred Meyer. Yeah, I haven't even heard of most of them either. But the proposed merger came as food prices have skyrocketed, and apparently I have to travel more around this great country of ours, and I plan to, in a van. Americans are now spending 26% more on groceries since 2020, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. People in the United States are spending the highest portion of their income on food than any point over the past 30 years, even though it's come down a significant amount. And the Odysseus lander, privately built spacecraft on the moon, has beamed back new photos from the lunar surface, showing the vehicle's much celebrated descent and the moments immediately after touchdown when it tipped over on its side. And I think, is it going to be able to get up? It's fallen and it can't get up. Odysseus, come on, hit the life alert button. Do they not have anybody that could do anything? They weren't planning for this, that it could tip over? Anyway, I never do weather, but I saw this weather headline. In the Midwest tonight, record warmth could be followed by frigid weather, creating the opportunity for possible tornadoes and hail the size of hen eggs. That sounds like big hail, and I just thought it was kind of funny that they referenced hen eggs specifically. Those are your headlines for the last 24 hours, fresh and hot, delivered. I produce this segment late every night, so when I post it, usually by midnight or when you get up in the morning, the world has stopped if I haven't covered it. If I haven't mentioned it in the headlines, it means it didn't happen. I kid. So many stories are undercovered and underreported, and I always want to hear from you. Please contribute to the headlines, standupwithpete@gmail.com. And now on to yesterday's most important audio clips that I found, according to me. Let's lead off with a clip where one Republican is signaling a new strategy. Prevent Joe Biden from giving the State of the Union speech. Don't even invite him. He's got to officially be invited by the House of Representatives to give the speech. But that is the new theory and idea that Scott Perry, Republican of Pennsylvania, and insurrectionist, election denier, traitor is floating on Fox News. Congressman Ted Lieu, Democrat, says, why are MAGA members afraid of President Biden speaking in the State of the Union? Well, because President Biden owned Republicans last year with his agile and sharp responses to disrespectful GOP heckling. Republicans scared the American people will see that Biden is one of the most effective presidents in history. But here he is, Scott Perry, on Fox News yesterday, floating the theory. Just maybe they won't invite him.
Use every single point of leverage, every single point, Maria, including the spending and certainly including an address to the people from Congress. He comes at the invitation of Congress. The Republicans are in charge of the House. There's no reason that we need to invite him to get more propaganda and to actually blame the American people for the crisis he caused. we can spend the time reminding America that on day one, he countervailed the last administration's policies that were securing our border. That's what probably the time would be better spent served using.
All right, well, House Speaker Mike Johnson formally already invited President Biden to address the joint session of Congress on March 7th and deliver the State of the Union. And President Biden said on social media that he's looking forward to it. So I don't think that strategy is going to work out very well for Republican provocateur Scott Perry. And here is Ken Buck. He's also a Republican, but he's got a shred of dignity, or at least adherence to the truth when it comes to whether or not Joe Biden should be impeached. Plus, he's retiring, but he was on Newsmax, which is the very popular right-wing conspiracy channel. And this is what he said to the Newsmax audience about the Biden family's guilt or innocence or evidence thereof.
Start off, and I want to ask you, the point of that segment and what Caitlin was trying to do there was to get a Republican to admit that this entire thing about Joe Biden is just a ruse. You played into that pretty effectively. I want to ask you why you did that.
Well, Rob, I didn't play into anything. She asked me about a particular allegation that was made that Smirnoff made that Joe Biden received $5 million. That particular allegation is not credible at this point in time. So there is no evidence that Joe Biden received money. When Senator Johnson talks about the Biden crime family and talks about the Don of the Biden crime family, you have to have evidence that Joe Biden received money or took some act specifically as a result of Hunter Biden receiving money from these various countries. No doubt Hunter Biden did receive that money.
There he goes. Cuck, rhino, left-wing radical Ken Buck. If you're a Republican and you disagree with the party line, which is written in chalk and then erased and then rewritten in blood and lies and tears, then you just get thrown out of the party, which is the case with Ken Buck. But still good to hear him say that on Newsmax for that audience, just to hear the truth for like 10 seconds there. And one more Republican. That's right. A third. How about this? Nikki Haley was on Fox News yesterday. She's still out there campaigning, making the case for her inevitably doomed presidential campaign.
If people don't look at what is happening, Donald Trump can't win a general election. The RNC is broke. He has spent $60 million of his own campaign contributions on legal fees. Now he's going to start draining it out of the RNC.
All right, there you go. Nikki Haley's still out there on the campaign trail. She's not going to be the Republican nominee, but I suppose she could run in a third party somehow ticket or a write-in campaign or just get her name out there for the next cycle. She's clearly going to stay in it till next Tuesday. Well, maybe not. Maybe she'll punch out before Super Tuesday, but I don't know why she would at this point. All right, well, here's Eric Swalwell. He was on MSNBC yesterday with Nicole Wallace trying to help us understand the Republican efforts to impeach Joe Biden and the types of people that they rely on as sources and witnesses. Also, he was wearing a sport coat and like a weird Patagonia vest under it, but whatever.
Let me ask you this. What is it that Democrats want from the Department of Justice when it comes to the Smirnoff use in the impeachment sham?
Yeah. Well, it's very clear that Smirnoff was working with Russian intelligence by his own admission. And the Republicans are so eager to put this out there just to beat up Joe Biden in furtherance of never accepting him as president. So we do want to know, what notice did you have of his lack of credibility? When did you learn that he was not a credible witness, and why would you continue to do this? Because now if you look at who they relied upon in their investigation, they have someone who was indicted for working essentially as a Chinese agent. They have someone who's been indicted for working essentially as a Russian agent. They have another witness who is serving a 14-year prison sentence. He's currently imprisoned. So they're just relying on the least credible people because they never will accept Biden as president. And so anything that furthers delegitimizing Biden, even if it means aligning with Russia, they're all in to do that.
There you go, Eric Swalwell on MSNBC yesterday. And now here is President Biden, who is hanging out for some reason with Seth Meyers. Was he doing his show? Maybe, I don't know, but maybe they were doing a bit. But they're eating ice cream cones. Vanilla ice cream cone President Biden had. So did Seth Meyers. And reporters started yelling questions. And one of them was he answered about what he's predicting could be a ceasefire in the Middle East. And he was ridiculed for answering the question while holding an ice cream cone. It did the optics weren't great, but the answer sounds promising.
Well, I hope by the beginning of the weekend. The end of the weekend. At least my national security advisor tells me that we're close. We're close. It's not done yet. And my hope is by next Monday we'll have a ceasefire.
All right, that is President Biden yesterday, so I hope he's right. That would be a very good outcome, but we'll see. All right, now I want to play for you a mashup of clips of the disgraced former president at the Black Conservative Conference over the weekend. I had thought he had only said one thing that you're about to hear him say about 4 really crazy things. Maybe I should have watched the whole speech, but trigger alert, you're about to hear Trump's voice, Tina. I'm sorry. But this must be heard. It's really outrageous, and he's talking to a group of black folks, and you can hear that it's it's different excerpts. This is made by MSNBC producers. I heard it on Morning Joe, and I just had to share it with you, and I'll give you Reverend Al Sharpton's lacing response after. But here he is. Brace yourself.
These lights are so bright in my eyes that I can't see too many people out there, but I can only see the black ones. I can't see any white ones, you see. That's how far I've come. That's how far I've come.
Oh, my God. Okay.
I got indicted for nothing, for something that is nothing. They were doing it because it's election interference. And then I got indicted a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time. And a lot of people said that's why the black people like me, because they have been hurt so badly and discriminated against. And they actually viewed me as I'm being discriminated against. It's been pretty amazing. I'm being indicted for you, the American people. I'm being indicted for you, the black population.
Oh, brutal.
The mugshot, we've all seen the mugshot. And you know who embraced it more than anybody else? The black population. It's incredible. You see black people walking around with my mugshot. You know, they do shirts and they sell them for $19 a piece. It's pretty amazing. Millions. By the way, millions of these things have been sold.
Oh, millions of them have been sold. They probably have been, as a matter of fact. Anyway, well, pretty outrageous, of course. And Reverend Al Sharpton was on Morning Joe. And, well, here's what he had to say in reaction to it.
Well, first of all, let's be clear. Donald Trump is using the stereotype of blacks being criminals, and therefore we would gravitate towards somebody in a mugshot. He's in a mugshot for trying to interfere with an election. Blacks were arrested to get the right to vote. That's what the marches were about. It is the epitome of an insult also when you think of the fact that it is a black man that is prosecuting him in Manhattan, Alvin Bragg, a black woman in Georgia, a black woman, the New York State Attorney General Letitia James. So he's saying that black people would relate to someone indicted for trying to undermine the elections by blacks, but we would go with him rather than them. The other part of this that is so amazing is Donald Trump himself has been part of these kinds of unfair prosecutions of blacks. It was he that took out ads in newspapers calling for the death penalty of 5 young black and brown boys of raping a white woman in Central Park who went to jail falsely. It was later proven they didn't do it because of DNA. Donald Trump said no, punish them anyway. So all of a sudden, I've been in this movement for 40, 50 years. I've never seen him stand up for blacks that were treated wrong by the criminal justice system. But now he's a symbol of being persecuted. He's being persecuted by black prosecutors, a black woman judge in the federal court in Washington, D.C., and any shameless blacks that are standing there applauding him needs to check the facts.
Needs to check the facts. There you go, Reverend Al, with a lacing response to the black conservatives and the disgraced former president's comments there. I asked Jason Johnson about that as well coming up, but also got to play for you this commentary by Bob Costas about Donald Trump. Costas, of course, legendary sports broadcaster, and he was on CNN on Sunday, Michael Smerconi's show, talking about Trump voters, basically. And they got a real kick out of it over on Fox News, where you hear first Harris Faulkner. She's playing this clip for Brian Kilmeade to respond to. And I thought I'd give you the whole thing here.
Critics are railing against sportscaster Bob Costas, who said this about former President Trump and his supporters on CNN this weekend. Let's watch.
He is by far the most disgraceful figure in modern presidential history. He's only become more disgraceful since 2016 and since 2020. He is a bubbling cauldron of loathsome traits. You have to be in the throes of some sort of toxic delusion in a toxic cult to believe that Donald Trump has ever been, in any sense, emotionally, psychologically, intellectually, or ethically fit to be president.
Brian.
I know Bob Costas. I know how bright he is. Best sport. By the time he was 34, he was the best sportscaster in the country, doing all the biggest events ever. I know that's exactly how he feels. But I think it's so shallow of him to think that you can have your feelings and put down 74 million people along the way. Who are supported, especially him coming from a place where people support their teams and their players and their boxers and their athletes, and people are loyal. There are people loyal to him for reasons they should be respected for and analyzed, because
but
once
everybody
again,
should
that's
be
the
respected.
Right.
Like, I mean, Democrats want their voters to be respected. Can you imagine if a Republican candidate called them all deplorable?
Yeah. Well, okay. Enemy of the people. That's what Donald Trump referred to reporters, journalists that were covering him. Enemy of the people. All right. I don't have much more to say about Stone Cold Stupid Brian Kilmeade's reaction, but I did want to give you some context. That's what how they reacted to it on Fox News, and I just love that Bob Costas rant. That was real good stuff. All right, well, so Dr. Jason Johnson is my guest on today's show. Over the weekend, there was some controversy about comments that he made on MSNBC. Chrissy Greer also made comments on MSNBC on Friday night. Looks like they're kind of starting to come out against some of these other commentators who happen to be black folks who just really make some real ignorant, uninformed, uneducated statements, which seem often to be kind of made to be provocative. I'm talking about people like Charlemagne the God and Killer Mike. And then you've got PhDs like Chrissy Greer and Dr. Jason Johnson. And those are the people who I respect the most because they're educators. They work with young black folks. Jason is at a historically black college at Morgan State University. Of course, Chrissy is at Fordham in New York, and they're brilliant and well thought out and have experience and credibility. And that's why I invite them on the show as opposed to other black folks who might be well known or even well respected, popular in their field, may it be music or sports or something else, but they probably shouldn't be commenting on or be taken seriously when they're talking about politics. That's what Chrissy's saying. That's what Jason's saying. I don't think either of them would mind me saying that for them. So over the weekend, Jason Johnson called out Killer Mike, and then Killer Mike got very upset about it and went on Twitter and went on a crazy rant about it. And when I was looking it up and trying to find reaction to it, I found this really interesting YouTube channel hosted by this woman named Tabitha, black woman. It's called Politics by Tabitha, political discussions to help inform and educate so that we can all make better decisions in the voting booth. And it's really good. She's got a huge following. And I'm going to play all 8 minutes of this clip from Politics by Tabitha on YouTube because she sets it up perfectly and gives her opinion and puts a little bit of background and thoughts about Killer Mike versus Dr. Jason Johnson. She even embeds the clip from MSNBC, part of the clip that the panel was talking about. So I'm going to give you all 8 minutes of it because I think it's really good. I think her analysis is really good. And then I will throw to my conversation with Jason Johnson. You'll have more context. And now you have a new YouTube channel to subscribe to if you want. Here it is, Politics by Tabitha and her reaction.
Good morning, everybody. I woke up and saw that Killer Mike is pissed off. Why is he pissed off? He's pissed off because he's finally hit mainstream news. Only problem is he doesn't like what mainstream news is saying about him. There's this show that comes on MSNBC on the weekends. It's called The Weekend, and it has Alicia Mendez, it has Simone Sanders, and it has Michael, what's his last name? I forget his last name. He's former chair of the RNC, black man, who is a never Trumper, right? And so this past weekend, they were talking about the racists speech that Donald Trump gave at the Black Conservative Federation Gala, right? And so that, and they were talking about Donald Trump's shoes and what Fox News had to say. And so they were playing the clips from the speech and playing the clips from what was said on Fox News. They had guest Dr. Jason Johnson on part of this panel, and this is what was said.
The only reason we have a mugshot is because of the black DA in Fulton County and the black sheriff that made sure he got one to ensure that he knew that he was not above the law.
Right.
So it is disgusting. It is offensive. I was gravely offended by the South Carolina Party chair, the Republican Party chair, who said, if you don't know by now, if I don't know by now, what?
Then you're
what am I supposed to accept?
Sure.
Right.
What am I supposed to accept?
Right.
When the sneakers came out, we didn't say it on the show. We said it in the break. We were talking. I'm like, it's really offensive because they think black people don't vote for them for sneakers. And then people go on Fox News and they say, black people don't vote for sneakers. At this point, it is like black Americans deserve an elevated discourse. Do they not think black men care about the economy? Like the sneakers, and then as we were talking about in the last block, and menthol cigarettes. Oh my God.
Yeah, because that's all we do is we wear gold lame sneakers and we smoke menthol cigarettes. But you have to, and we have mug shots too. So you have to understand though, this is a room of very unique kind of black folk. Okay, it's a bunch of bad lineups and members only jackets, right? Like that. That's what we're dealing with here. And so I'm not surprised that these sorts of people accept that. These are the same people who listen to Killer Mike. These are the same people who listen to idiots on podcasts. These are the same large number of black folks who listen to Joe Rogan. Those people are out there. I'm less concerned with anybody who is okay with Trump's racism than I am with the people who are so disconnected from the process that they're not worried about his racism. Those people are more of a concern for me than the people voting for the guy.
I just think this is his pitch, though, to the sneakers with this. Yes, he was speaking to the room, but the cameras were there. He was speaking to black people across the country. These are their talking points. This is what it is.
Now, I was present in the moment, and what I mean by that is that I watched that episode live, and I know that Dr. Jason Johnson went on to say something along the lines of, and this is, what Killer Mike is basically getting other black people to do, which is to turn towards Trump. He didn't say that specifically, just something along those lines. And baby, did that piss off Killer Mike. Killer Mike went dancing right on over to Twitter, and this is what he tweeted. Someone tell this liar, I am not a Trump surrogate. He didn't say that you are all out in support of Donald Trump. It takes an evil amount of willful ignorance and arrogance to lie like this to the people. Shame on you, liar. Whoever raised you to lie should be ashamed. Have good day, y'all. Stand on truth, even in disagreement. Don't lie. Like I said, I don't remember Dr. Jason Johnson saying that Killer Mike was a Trump surrogate, that he was 100% in support of Donald Trump. What I heard was Dr. Jason Johnson saying that the bullshit that Killer Mike peddles out there on whatever platform he is allowed on is leading people, black people, towards Trump. And all that he's peddling is misinformation and lies. But Killer Mike didn't stop there. He was so pissed off, he went on to tweet this. And the liar is Dr. Jason Johnson. As an educator and black man, you do us all a disservice to lie in an attempt to slander me. Killer Mike, you are slandering yourself. You are lying to our people. What you are doing is leading them to vote for Donald Trump, and you know it. And to call this man slanderous and saying that he's doing a disservice when you are the one doing a disservice to our people, when you have become a danger to black women, you have no room to talk. He goes on to say, you only prove yourself to be disgraceful and disgusting. I myself, Killer Mike, think you are disgraceful and disgusting. The clips that are running around about you and how I have watched you move in these Atlanta streets to turn black men away from black women in politics. Yeah, you are disgraceful and disgusting. To disagree is not a wrong, but to lie and slander in your disagreement is, sir, do better. I'm saying the same thing to you, Killer Mike. Well, the news got back to Dr. Jason Johnson. Yeah, he found out that Killer Mike, his feathers are all ruffled. And this is what Dr. Jason Johnson had to say. Plain and simple, short and sweet. Hey, Killer Mike, I did not call you a Trump surrogate this morning. Go back and actually watch the clip. Happy to talk this out directly anytime. Now, I would be curious to see if Killer Mike does a sit down with Dr. Jason Johnson, because the lies that he peddles in his fast talking as he stands confident in his bullshit, that's not going to fly with Dr. Jason Johnson. We just saw him peddle some bullshit about trade school and black men and black women versus black boys. We just saw him peddle some bullshit policy idea that makes no fucking sense. Now, he can peddle that to the people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in front of another group of black men. But none of those black men are educated, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. welcomes the bullshit that Killer Mike peddles. That shit will not fly with Dr. Jason Johnson. I love the fact, Killer Mike, that you're being called out, because I know that's where you want to be, on mainstream news media. But I love the fact that you aren't being presented as you want to be presented. They are presenting you for what you are actually doing. You are shilling for Donald Trump, whether it is your intent or not. It is the impact on our community that matters. I'll see y'all later.
All right, there it is. Politics by Tabitha on YouTube. That's her commentary, and I'm sure there's plenty of views out there. I wanted to give you someone other than mine or Jason's. And by the way, here is the specific clip. I think you should be able to hear this okay, of what Killer Mike was reacting to.
Philosophy on this. It ain't about switching votes. Okay, Donald Trump, Killer Mike, any of his surrogates, any rapper that he got out of jail. Yes, it's about keeping people home. It's about saying Joe Biden is terrible. I'm terrible. Your life hasn't changed much. Don't get involved. Yes, he ain't trying to switch anybody over. He's trying to get you to stay home.
It is a voter depression tactic. In 2016,
all right. He says Killer Mike, any of his surrogates. There's absolutely possible that it could be misinterpreted by Killer Mike or anybody that Jason was saying that Killer Mike is a surrogate. I heard it as there's a comma, Killer Mike or any of his surrogates. But regardless, all he had to do was reach out to Jason privately. But instead, he went off on him and ridiculous. So in my conversation with Jason today, he addresses that, the problem with it, and mentions that they are supposed to talk. So hopefully they did and were able to come to some kind of common ground on it. But I got the scoop for you because Jason's such a good friend of mine, and I was really happy to have him. You should check out his great podcast on the Slate Network. It's called A Word with Jason Johnson. Of course, you can watch him on MSNBC, where he's a regular contributor. Follow him on social media and listen to my conversation with him right now. Let's get into it about things. Yeah. I hated to open Twitter over the weekend and see this dispute between Killer Mike and you. Do you want to comment on that, or do you not want to give that any air because you want it to end?
I'll say this, and I mean this like as respectfully as possible. I think it's really important that when people have an opportunity to talk about politics, that we always understand that people's intentions may be good, regardless of what we feel about their politics. So that's the thing I can say about that. The other thing that I'll say is this, and I can share this with you. We're going to be in touch. Good. So, me and Killer Mike have a very close friend in common. Good. And so we were playing phone tag throughout the course of the weekend, but we're actually going to end up having a conversation. So.
I'm so happy to hear that. Is there any chance that you'll tape it and share it or not?
that I'm not going to do out of respect. I don't think there's I don't think there's a one-state consent rule.
The private conversation, airing out grievances, and then public conversation between the two of you would be interesting. And the reason I say this is only because I hate to see black men fighting. And what do I mean by that?
Did you not enjoy Django?
That I enjoyed. No, but what I mean by that especially is, and I mean that in every sense of what it means. I feel especially unable to help. It's not my place to say anything, to do anything. And yet I want people that are, trying to get towards similar endpoints to be, with respect with each other, to be kind and respectful to each other, and to see him, saying those types of things about you and you having to defend yourself. I was like, I don't like this. I don't like these two guys arguing. This isn't good for the cause of civil rights, of all kinds of different issues that we could name, and I wish I could be more articulate about how it made me feel to see him calling you out, one of the people I care about most and respect the most, based on who I know you are and what I know you're trying to do. And so it hurt me a little bit to see that kind of dispute. And I think it's normal and I think it's okay, but I hope that you guys can talk.
Well, I will say this, and this is
tell me about my feelings as a white man.
I can tell you about you. This is a larger conversation, and I think it's an important one. And I'm gonna say some things as respectfully as I can, because like I said, he and I are playing phone tag right now. What you have happening in 2024 is you have a tremendous amount of anxiety on the part of the majority of the people in this country that we could be facing the return of an angry, violent, racist, incompetent, corrupt man into the White House.
Yes, it's got all of us on edge every day in the run up to the November election. It's hard to relax. We just so badly want to be able to exhale. But for 9 years, we've had to worry about this tyrant.
Exactly. And frankly, even after Election Day, given what happened on January 6th and the absolute ineptitude, incompetence and impotence of our Department of Justice, we're not safe, right? Like, even if Donald Trump is defeated again at the polling booth, it doesn't mean that his armies won't try their own handmaiden's tale attack again on Washington. So we're not free of this. It has been an ongoing coup. That is the context in which all political discussions about voting and voting activity have to be understood right now.
Yeah, that's a well said. I fully agree that you always have to have that be the endpoint, the context, the framing of it. We're up against this. And so all these other things that we used to argue about and matter and be able to have nuance about, they have to end like, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So part of what you see happening here, and I can say this fairly and objectively, there's a clip I'm going to send you, or maybe you can add it in.
I can.
About on Friday, a very good friend of mine and also a friend of yours, I think you've had on the show, Dr. Christina Greer. You've had Dr. Greer on the show, right?
Oh, come on, son.
Okay, yeah. I know this. And Dr. Greer and I are friends.
She and you both sent me a picture of you guys together recently as a result of us all being friends. I do feel completely left out now when you're like, Chrissy Greer. I'm like, what? She's one of my best friends. Yes, love her. And so go ahead. I may have shared this clip.
So Dr. Greer went on television Friday, Stephanie Ruhl's show.
Yes, I did share this clip.
Yeah, and she talked about the sort of conversation that we're having right now, and the conversation that I'm having, and I think a lot of people in these spaces are having, is that there is this sort of inordinate focus on African American voting behavior. Right. And who influences African-American voting behavior and why certain voices are considered to be important and if those voices are important. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. And that's why people get concerned. And I'm not going to mention any specific names. What I am going to say is that there is sometimes a desire on the part of mainstream press outlets to focus on stories that raise your anxiety in order to keep you engaged. So whether that's in the form of, whether that's in the form of this person has this opinion, I'll give you a perfect example.
It's all of local news. It's not, it sounds like you're tiptoeing around it. But
I'm getting there. There's an article on WTOP, which is a local station here in the DMV. That's like, a new poll shows, and it was a Howard poll, which is crazy. This is like a Howard University poll. And it says, support in Michigan for Joe Biden has dropped amongst African Americans from it was 90 to 46%. And then it was saying that the support for Trump had gone from 10 to 26% or whatever it is. Right. And it's a crazy poll. Right. And a friend of mine sends this to me. He's like, if you look at how this poll was conducted, it was conducted online. And the primary universe of people they were interviewing were gamers. What the hell? But the headline is, Joe Biden support drops in half. You see this kind of crap all the time. So someone like me, who's a political scientist who studies these kinds of issues, I always think it's important to point out, look, ultimately, Black people are not going to be the ones that, quote unquote, save this country, right? Black men are not at risk when it comes to turning to Trumpism. The numbers are not showing up. I'll give you a perfect example of this. And again, this all leads to this weekend and everything else like that. You look at the South Carolina primary, right? Where I think Trump got, I think the primary was 60-40. But it was 97% white in 2016, and it was 92% white in 2024. Okay. So the South Carolina Republican primary, got 5% more non-white people. Right. Here's the thing. South Carolina is like 30-something% black. If there were an exodus of black people to Trumpism, it would show up in a primary. You would start seeing larger numbers of black people turning out in order to support Trump, especially in a state where black people are a really, really large percentage of the population. But the numbers aren't showing because it's not there. So there's this sort of myth of like, we've got to be careful about black men voting for Donald Trump. And I think it's unfair. I think it's unreasonable. And again, most of the polling numbers suggest that the group of men who are most susceptible of moving to voting for Trump or voting for Republicans are younger Asian and Hispanic men. It ain't black guys.
And in South Carolina,
is on black people.
Could be a lot of Indian Americans and others that don't identify as white in terms of that increase. But let me just, I'm not sure that you finished that point. I want to ask you a very specific question about that, coming into the full context of what Chrissy said and what you're seeing in the whole.
Well, my point was, and then I'll answer your question. My point was simply to say that so what you have happening is there's a lot of discussion now about who has real information and whose voices should be getting amplified when it comes to discussions of black voting behavior and black interests. And sometimes the problem becomes that you have a large number of people talking about these issues and not everybody is equally informed. And I can tell you this, Pete, because this is a conversation that African-American political analysts and political scientists and journalists, whatever, talk about all the time. There is a penchant sometimes to, and this is not new. This doesn't have to do really with this weekend. This is historic, right? Of 25, 30 years ago, you would have a news network, sit down and talk to Bill Cosby about the state of black America. He's an entertainer. Why the hell is Bill Cosby being asked about his opinion on or his predictions or his prescriptions for black America? Nobody was asking Alan Alda, what do we got to do to get the white vote in the 70s? Right? I mean, seriously.
It's so just yes. No, I have a lot to react to about that. It outrages me the way that certain people are asked questions, because the bottom line is this: you can get on TV, you can get famous, you can become an influencer in many ways if you'll just say a certain thing, because you'll be one of the few to say it. Be more specific. Cable news loves a new black Republican they can book. Love it. And it's hilarious because I've been on with so many of them over the years, and they're the dumbest pundits. They're not good, but they're willing to say certain things as a black person. And some of them get better at it and are obviously really good at it. And I've been around many of them throughout my career. I've been opposite them, and it's always super awkward to be arguing with a person of color about race. But I have someone like you in my other ear telling me it's okay, scream it at him. But the bottom line is you're asking Charlemagne the God about politics on ABC's This Week. No, I'm sorry. I don't like that guy. I mean, I don't like him being very influential. I don't think that his analysis is very good. I think he's entertaining. I think he's shocking. I think he's a lot of things. But I don't even like a lot of the nicknames in the black community, specifically that one. I'll say it. No. I don't care. You don't get to be the God. I'll call you almost anything you want. Killer Mike, fine. Anything you want. But not. So the point being, certain people should not be asked. But if they'll say whatever you want to hear, and it's a point of view that you don't often hear from a woman, from a black person, from a Hispanic person, you are on air. Let's record. Let's go.
And
make news. Everybody reacts. Clickety click.
And I want to say this because I think it's very important in this context, and given, like I said, how this conversation started, which is like I said, I've been playing phone tag with Killer and I, he and I are going to talk. So it's, but I want you to also understand that, of course, everybody who works in this space has different philosophies about how they deal with conversations. So in my case, I want to make it very clear. I didn't argue with Killer Mike online. I didn't.
I noticed.
He tweeted. I have tweeted absolutely one time this weekend. That's it. And I made the offer that we communicate offline. And like I said, and that's what we're going to do, because I don't think, whether people agree or not, I do not think that it is always productive to have back and forth. That is something that I have learned.
It's mostly not productive, not in short form and not in public. Yeah, no, because there's yes, of course not.
So everything that I'm going to say, he and I will have a conversation and whatever the result of that conversation will be. But I wanted to make it clear, to the audience is like, no, I was not going to go back and forth, because the other thing is, and some of this just has to do with professionalism and integrity and everything else like that. Once I say to somebody, let's take this offline or let's speak directly. Yeah, that's it. I'm not going to subtweet you. I'm not going to make an Instagram post. I'm not going to do anything like that. That's me. Now, some people, that's not how they operate. And I'm not really actually referring to anybody. I'm just saying some people are like, no, I want to have this out here. Some people philosophically think that if it's a public statement, then this disagreement should be had publicly. Maybe that works for some people. For me, what I have found is that speaking to people directly, even if you don't agree, ends up being a much more productive way for us to go forward. Always.
I try to start, that conversation before someone that might attack me. I'm like, can we go out and have a drink before you just try to destroy my character? And
I will say this about, and I'll say this about anybody. I think this is really important. And again, it's not just a matter of me being careful. It's a matter of me, recognizing the power that you have, the power that I have. We all have platforms.
Maturity and responsibility.
Yeah, we all have platforms, and we have to be responsible for what we say. We have to be responsible for how we respond to what people say. Dude, what I can go on YouTube at any point and see random people doing whole podcasts off of content that I have said in other places.
Yes, yeah, for sure. It's a really lucrative way. I mean, a lot of popular YouTube shows are just people commenting on other shows.
Yeah. And so, while I can't starve them of content, even though I think those people are kind of leeches in their own way, come up with your own stuff. Well, I can't starve people of content. What I can do is I'm not going to feed the intellectual internet paparazzi. Like, there's no point to that. And again, and all of this is in the context. And like I said, and I'm glad that you saw what Dr. Grio posted. All of this is in the context of y'all, we could all be we talked about this last weekend on MSNBC. There's an article, an NBC article that just came out this week about the fact that you have people in this country who are preparing to flee if Trump gets back into office. And this is different than in 2016, where people are like, oh my God, if Trump gets elected, I'm moving to Canada. Some people did that. Some people did it because of the pandemic. But now you literally have people like they talked to Vindman, right? The people who testified during the impeachment hearings and everything else like that. Those people are terrified. Yeah. They're like, if this guy gets back into office, he has said publicly, I'm going to jail these people.
Oh, he's going to have a list. He
can very well have a list. I'm going to throw John Kerry in jail. I'm going to do all of these things. And so to me, it's like when that is in the background, right? It is absolutely terrifying and dare I would say, I'm not going to speak for anybody else, irresponsible for anyone with a platform to suggest that both sides are equally bad.
Yeah, only one side has a list. Only one side plans to open the door at Arkham Asylum and let out all the cartoon villains and maybe even give them jobs in the administration, RFK Jr.
Yeah, yes. So that's what I'm saying. So every conversation that's being had about these issues within the Asian American community, within the Latino community or Latinx community, depending on what definition one uses, or the African American community, is all with the idea of like, oh yeah, this could get serious. Yeah. He could go after, Trump could weaponize, the IRS to go after anybody on television. I mean, we've already, this because you and I have talked about this past. We've already seen it with Twitter. I'm not on Twitter as much as I used to because it was very clear about a year and a half ago, once Musk took over, that he started to suppress and suspend and change the algorithm on the handles of people that he didn't like ideologically. Yeah. It is bizarre just by inertia. It does not make any sense that I have not gained a Twitter one follower in like 2 years.
Yes. And I've heard that anecdotally from several people who fit in a certain category or lane. Before I know you got to go, I got to ask you this one question.
I got a couple more minutes.
Okay.
So I love talking to you.
I love talking to you, but you have a lot of demands on your time. I know you have a Lego thing you probably have to do or something. Oh, I thought I was talking to Waj. I don't know who I was talking to. I just put his life on yours. I'm sorry. All right. So I want to ask you, Trump says at CPAC, I think, or no, he was talking to black conservatives.
Yeah.
You see that?
Yeah,
we could talk about that. We could talk about that event for a while. We should have infiltrated. You should infiltrate that event next year.
So here's what's funny. I used to go to CPAC.
I did too. I went to it maybe 4 or 5 times.
Yeah. I've been to CPAC a couple times. I went to the NRA convention.
Oh,
right.
Never.
I went there in Atlanta a couple years ago and wrote about it. This is the thing. One, and I've recognized this. I've just really had conversations with people about it this week. It's like I am still someone who carries with them a legitimate concern about COVID. And so here we are 4 years later, and I still have a level of discomfort in crowds that I did not have beforehand. Mm-hmm. I just do. Right.
Yeah, I think that's common. I have it not to a large extent, but it's there.
Yeah. And so for me, I know a lot of people is like, we outside, blah, blah, blah. I mean, look, they just had, it's not reported on as much, but they just had another terrible wave over the holidays. And I knew a bunch of people who started getting sick again. I don't want to get sick. And so just going into a random crowd or a party or an event or something else like that gives me a level of anxiety that I never used to have.
If you're going to go to an event, it better be a really great event with people that you love, as opposed to the Black Conservative Conference to get engaged with some folks about some things.
Well, here's the bigger issue. I would go to the Black Conservative Conference just to see, but here's the problem. When I go to any large event, when I go to any talk or whatever that I do now, I mask up. And the moment you mask in an environment like that, then you really can't be a neutral observer, because everyone's going to see you and be like, why are you wearing a mask? And then it's like, okay, now I can't do anything. Right.
Oh, maybe you should wear a Larry Ellison mask. I mean, a Larry Elder mask.
I was about to say Larry Ellison.
Ruined the joke. Fucking ruined.
Ralph Ellison mask. I would be the Invisible Man if I was wearing a Ralph Ellison mask.
All I needed to say was Herman Cain. No, that wouldn't have worked either.
Wow.
Shit.
No.
All right. So I got to get your response to what Trump said, because I feel like everybody's kind of missing a point. On all the Sunday shows, Tim Scott, other people are all asked, Black Republicans are asked, Reince Priebus. Wasn't it really racist when Donald Trump said to these Black conservatives, when he made the point that a lot of Black folks see the indictments against me and they relate to me and they're supporting me as a result? I myself have seen this type of opinion from Black folks being interviewed by local news stations, just, people on the street, much less people on news and other conferences, where there's this attraction to, as there is the mafia and other organized crime. There's the idea that you're being prosecuted. I've been prosecuted unjustly or not. Man's coming down on you. The man came down on me. I relate to that. I actually think there's a very small percentage of Black folks, probably mostly men, that might be true of. I think I've heard it, and no one is saying that.
I think that is absolute BS. I think it's BS. And the reason that I think it's BS is because
he's got the mugshot now and all that stuff.
I mean, it's sort of what we've talked about at the very beginning, which is local reporters, just like some national reporters, want to find the story that's going to be the most interesting, right? That's why New York Times pitch bot is like, you may think that in deeply blue Maryland that most people support, Joe Biden, but at this one diner, right? Like, everyone is trying to find the outlier. And I've said this every time we go into an election year. You have people with political Baron Munchausen syndrome. You know what Baron Munchausen syndrome is, right?
It is the idea of, I can't explain it, being captured.
No. So Baron Munchausen syndrome is usually described when, like, a parent will make a child sick in order to get the sympathy from other people, right? Like, you create a problem or a sickness or an illness in order to get sympathy.
A rare psychological and behavioral condition in which somebody fabricates or induces symptoms of illness in themselves.
And oftentimes children. It does apply to people who do it to kids. So I say that we get this every election season. I call it political Baron Munchausen syndrome, which is somebody says, hey, I have this crazy outlier opinion. What's wrong with me? Come talk to me, reporter. Right. I'm a black guy. I think I might want to talk to Trump. Ooh, I'm a little Trump curious. It's like people who say they're undecided. They're full of crap. Nobody is undecided. You literally have two incumbents running against each other again, right? So all of these conversations where you get people with these crazy opinions, it's because they want attention. It is political Baron Munchausen syndrome. It is. And that's why I find it so disingenuous, which is going to get you more clicks as your local reporter in Texas and Georgia and Illinois, to have a conversation with a bunch of 40-something-year-old black guys who are like, I don't know if I'm going to vote, but I ain't voting for the crazy-ass racist. That's 90% of everybody. But let me find the guy. Yeah. Let me find the one guy who's going to say something different because he knows he's going to get on TV.
To be fair, the young black man who said that he identifies with Trump because, like him, he's been taken down by the police, did then get on. He was on his BMX with a giant front tire, and he rode away screaming, yee, 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 yee. So that is, I will say that's the guy who said he identifies with Trump because of his criminal indictments. That's the guy they found. They interviewed him. He then went off into a wonderland and lived a life of unreality.
And here's the thing. I will tell you this. I will share this conversation. I had this a couple weeks ago. I say the same thing about a lot of other prevalent political issues. And I think people have to understand the silos that they're in, right? I have a focus group every week because I'm with a bunch of college kids. Yeah. And even my college kids at an HBCU, I talk to them all the time and I say, you're not normal because you're in college, right? Like even being in college separates you from another 19-year-old who's working at Chick-fil-A right now or, is in the military or something else like that. When I tell you a lot of the issues, this is not new, but a lot of the issues that our 24-hour cable talks about or our news networks, local news networks talk about, it ain't what regular people are thinking about. It's not. And certainly regular black folks. And I'm not saying this because I want a particular outcome one way or another. I'm saying this because the level of sophistication and political engagement you have to say, first off, forgive me, I care enough about Donald Trump and what's happening to him. I know what he is being prosecuted for. I have had similar experiences myself. I have empathy for this stranger. Yeah. That is some 3-4 dimensional layer caring, right? Yeah. That's not how this happens. Right. You might have somebody who says, I care about Meg the Stallion getting shot. I care about Tory Lanez going to jail for it because I consume their music on a regular basis. And I go to TikToks that talk about that entertainment on a regular basis. Ain't nobody paying attention to Donald Trump's, different legal issues enough that they wake up every day and before they go to work, they're like, you know what, man, I really feel like he's being prosecuted by the man. Give me a break. And I'll tell you this, and I've had this conversation with multiple people about other international issues. Most people, and this is not just black people, most people are way more concerned with the price of gas, with their health care, with their job security, with the 14-year-old unarmed black kid who got shot down the street by the cops, and the cops are claiming that the child had an AK-47. Most people are way more concerned about that stuff than they happen to be about the higher level philosophical issues, including protecting democracy, that we often spend time talking about. So that's why I know this stuff is silly. And that's why, to go back to what we said at the beginning, there is a level of anxiety about those amongst those of us who do see the larger picture when we see what appears to sometimes be conversations based on ignorance or short-sightedness. And again, but I still come at that from a place of, I think most people are well-intentioned. And, even if they're wrong. Well,
I'm not sure. I think some of the people who get a lot of attention aren't well-intentioned. Or they're not even in good faith. Or if I'm really bending over backwards, they really are so arrogant that they think they their opinion should be aired on a national outlet on a certain thing. I've always been so careful about that. I created a show so that I could interview experts and people who knew things. And yes, I sometimes go on TV and talk about things, but it's a few minutes at the of a time. And I'm always prepared, having talked to an expert, just before, to get their take. And I'm good at parroting it, but I'm also very transparent that I am a parrot. Chirp, chirpity chirp. Thank you for listening.
Let me ask you something from your perspective on this. Have you watched since his return? Have you watched Jon Stewart since his return to the Daily Show?
Yeah, I watched most, I think, of both of his episodes. Yeah,
because I think this will be week 3. What have you thought of it? Because it goes to something that you just said. But what have you thought of his return?
I think that people need to understand how nuanced his thinking is about his presentation and the long game that he's playing. For example, the role that he took as an activist with 9/11 first responders was not a publicity stunt. It wasn't to burgeon his image. It's because I know him. I know John. And it's because he, like a lot of other very influential celebrities, realize how influential they are, and they decide to use that influence for good. George Clooney comes to mind. Obviously, a lot of black folks when it comes to civil rights, women when it comes to gender
Danny
equity
Glover.
issues. Sure, lots and lots of
Kerry
people.
Washington,
But like in this case, John's a rich Jewish white man. He chose to, stand up for not only 9/11 first responders, but now veterans who have suffered because of the burn pits and so on. I think when it comes to the show and the Daily Show, specifically when it comes to the campaign, he there is also playing the long game. His first time back, he didn't want to just come in and pound Donald Trump. He made the point about age. And then I think a whole bunch of people who criticize him were a little bit bad faith in there. It's one episode back. I think his second episode was, gives more nuance to what he's going to do. And I think that we're going to see him try to be as fair-minded as he can. But also, if you listen closely, he's clearly against fascism, Trumpism, MAGA, everything else. I see by your reaction, you might not be on the same page with me. According to your face.
Yeah. So it was a couple things. One, I gave a talk last week at the University of Maryland College Park, and it was about the history of black political analysts, actually. And I talked about a lot of these issues, ironically. And I asked
you only gave that talk because I canceled.
Oh, pretty much. I mean, they told me, they're like, Jason, we had a white guy in here who was going to be much better at this than you are, but we can, it's Black History Month. We have a couple of days.
Yeah, I forgot. That's why I let it go through.
We sort of, he was benevolent. And so it's interesting. This is a group of graduate students and faculty and staff. And I asked them, how many of you guys have watched the new Daily Show since Jon Stewart came back? And only one person said yes. And I was shocked by this until it dawned on me that, yes, we're at a point where, because of cord cutting and the silos in which people get their information, and you and I, we should do it sooner rather than later. I need to have a whole extensive conversation on the air about digital addiction and information silos. I've been giving lectures about that for a while. We're in a very, very, very scary place.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of work I've been doing on that. But the idea being that Stewart was brought back because of a larger issue that we're seeing in television, which is these networks are losing audiences right and left, right? What's a hit show today would have been canceled 8 years ago by ratings, right? Or would have been borderline. And they drag back Jon Stewart because they're like, we need something old and familiar because we're afraid to try something new. But what he is saying, at some level, some people feel is no longer in line with the dire nature of what we're facing. I understand people who said you can't both sides age when one guy is a fascist dictator. You can't both sides that. It's irresponsible. I understood that criticism of Stewart. I also understood Stewart's criticism, his response in the second week, which is like, it ain't my job. First off, I'm a comedian, right? But the second thing is, I'm not doing my job if I ignore the obvious. This is what people are talking about. Am I going to do a whole show where I don't pretend that Joe Biden is old? Am I going to do a whole show where I don't pretend that Donald Trump has been stumbling over his own words for 8 years now? At least Joe Biden has a stutter.
Yeah. I mean, listen, first of all, they didn't drag him back.
Well, yes. To be fair.
I know for a fact that Jon Stewart has an offer on the table, literally, from every major media company, from SiriusXM to CNN to all of them. All of them have offered him a boatload of money. Number two, he's on Mondays, and the other hosts are black and women and generally young or Asian. You know, pretty much they have a host you saw.
Not Roy, but that's a whole other conversation.
I don't know what's going on with Roy, and I didn't realize that he hadn't hosted. But if I'm Roy, Roy is an exception because Roy is actually one of the very best comedians in the country, and he can kind of do whatever he wants. If he really wants to host the Daily Show, I don't know that they were ever going to hire him. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to really be too upset for Roy because he's that good and he can do, I think, whatever he wants. He kind of has been in that place for a while. I haven't talked to him about his thoughts on this, obviously. But my final point is simply this. I think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but this is what I think about myself, and I don't think you will. It's my job to help convince people in my category. So what I'm doing in my town and my school board right now is arguing with other white straight men about LGBT issues. And it's better for me to do it than the young trans girl or a woman or even a gay white man in my. So I think Jon Stewart has got a lot of credibility because of his activism with both veterans and the first responder community. And I think that given him a Monday night to bring some of those people along, he's a trusted person in journalism. I think it matters. I think it matters who he's talking to. And I think that he's very conscious of, and his staff is young and now this time around more diverse. I'm not sure how much of it's Trevor Noah's staff or not. I don't think a lot of it. A couple people were there when he was there. So that's my thoughts. White people have a responsibility to convince other white people that the moon is not made of cheese.
Well, the moon's not real anyway. We faked the whole landing.
Well, you know, yeah.
Do you know how many crazy here?
Do you know how many men walked on the moon? I looked it up over the weekend.
I don't know. It's flat. So if they walk more than 2 steps, they'll fall off and go back to Earth.
So it's my job to convince people in my lane that that's not true, is my point. Okay. That's my point of Jon Stewart. We do have a responsibility to bring our people, our kinfolk, our race folk along. We do. I think I do. I have to. And I think it matters. And I think it makes a difference. I know that it makes a difference.
It does. And it's funny. I meant to text you back. It's been it's been a crazy couple of weeks this first month, some of which I have to tell you offline. But I will say this. I did appreciate that text you sent about the speech that you gave about you standing up, because you are the perfect sort of example of like, hey, I'm taking this activism and engaging people at the local level, et cetera, et cetera. But I also say this. I understand why people don't have the patience for what may be Jon Stewart's long game. I don't say that I agree with them because I don't view him. I'm a content creator myself, right? I go on and I do political analysis. So I don't look at Jon Stewart the way that probably a lot of other people do, who are mostly just consumers of content as opposed to creators of content. So I understand what he's saying. I understand where he falls on the spectrum of things. It's very obvious. But for someone who wakes up every day thinking we're 7 months away from possibly losing any semblance of what this country looks like for forever, right? The idea that anyone could even pretend, that there are problems on both sides is very horrifying. And I understand people who feel that way. I don't think that's insincere. I don't think Jon Stewart's lost it. I still found the show to be entertaining. I will be watching, well, probably not watching. I usually listen to it the next day, while I'm working out. But
I think he's going to, find me somebody who can do what he's able to do in a one-on-one interview with an ignorant Republican state lawmaker as a result of them literally being intimidated by them. There's a lot of great interviewers out there, tough interviewers out there. I'm not saying there aren't, but Jon, I think his credibility on that and taking people to task, and those moments go viral, and I think he'll probably create several more during the time. You saw that Jimmy Kimmel interview people on the street that he did. Oh,
yeah.
I mean, things like that, comedians asking people, Trump supporters and so on, questions. I think they're extremely effective for the culture, for people's opinions, to prove that hypocrisy and cultism dominate this thread of thinking. I think comedians are doing a great job at that. And I think Jon, kind of helped really create that genre for this era.
Yes.
And I think he'll do that. So I like this conversation. I want to hear a lot more about that whole conversation with digital addiction. I'll let you go, but let's do that soon. Do you want to say anything about your podcast, recent episode, plug anything else before we go? So
I want to highlight two things. So one, I had an amazing conversation. Do you know Natasha Alford?
I think I should, because I think we're from the same town, even though I think it's different sides of the tracks.
Yeah. She's from Syracuse.
Yeah, me too. Syracuse. I think she's from Black Syracuse, and I'm from White Syracuse.
Dude, you really should have her on.
No, I will. That's why I was hoping you would mention this one.
Yeah.
Natasha Alford.
Yeah. Natasha Alford. She's at Princeton now. She's the digital director at the Grio. I've known Natasha for a long time, and her book, American Negra, is fantastic. And you interview people, and sometimes you're just getting through the book because you got to interview them. Sometimes you're like, this is great. And I know her, and there were parts of the book that I was like cheering and welling up and everything else like that. And you being from Syracuse as well, you guys would have a wonderful conversation. So yeah, definitely check out my podcast, A Word. I just did an interview with Natasha Alford about her book. I have to say this is something I feel very good and credited about. My podcast moves books. I had Clay Kane on, and Clay Kane, who is also awesome, who you
I know Clay, and we've been in contact trying to get him on for his new book. A lot of my listeners love Clay. I went to meet him at his recent book release. His book has been on the New York Times bestseller list for 3 weeks. Oh, I didn't know that. That's amazing news.
And when we talked, I had him on the show, I had him on my podcast, and he was like, the book sales went up afterwards, man. Thanks so much. Clay is a great person.
Great.
And what you can also talk to him about, and then I'll close with sort of the one I'll have this week. But the other great thing to talk to Clay about is, here's a guy who is a radio host. He does an hour a day. So he talks to people from all over the country, all over the world. He writes this great book on the history of Black Republicans, right? Black Republican behavior, voting tendencies, voting behavior, everything else like that. It is a New York Times bestseller for the last 3 weeks. That is the person who should be getting interviewed all across the news. That's what we're talking about here. Because if you've got somebody who wrote a New York Times bestseller about Black Republicans throughout time, you'd think that's the person you should talk to about, hey, what are we seeing now? And what may or may not be Trump's appeal? Or is this even real? Or is it just a grift? That's the kind of thing. And if we want to talk about the behavior and thinking and thought processes of Black and Latino voters, what could be better than a Black American and Puerto Rican woman like Natasha Alford, who grew up on the rough side of the tracks in Syracuse and went to Harvard, right? Like, there are stories out there, and there are people who, again, I'm always happy to platform on my podcast, A Word on Slate, who have stories to tell about the areas that people claim they're interested in. But all too often, I think our mainstream media ignores them because they'd rather get the outlier than somebody who's got some really fun, interesting, engaging things to say.
Or if they don't know that they have written this book or that they exist, which is kind of, in my opinion, malpractice. Like, a big part of why I have credibility is I'm a good booker. I find good guests to talk, and I listen to my audience. They help me find these people. I vet them out. And, the idea that some mainstream booker wouldn't know of Clay or this young woman's work is, what's her name again?
Natasha Alford.
Natasha's work, that's their fault. Like, sometimes they just don't know. And I'm always astonished by how bad bookers are in all of media. But all right, well, both those books and both of those guests I will reach out to. Thank you for the tips, reminders, and as always for your time. I love you. I'm so happy to talk to you, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Yes, I'm actually going to hit you up off mic later on this week.
Great. Looking forward to hearing more. Thank you. All right, buddy.
Thanks, man.
All right, there you go. Jason Johnson clearing it up for us. What did you think? I'd love to hear from you, and I heard more from him. We talked for a while later on, gave me some more insight and background. Nothing too surprising, and probably it will all come out soon. But hopefully he and Killer Mike talked yesterday, and I look forward to hearing from him again. As always, go listen to his podcast, A Word, on the Slate Network, and follow him on social media. Let him know that you heard him here. He's got to have him stop by and hang out. That would be really fun. Thank you to you bumblebees who are still listening all the way to the end. I hope you liked today's show. I put a lot into it, and if you did and you want to pay more for your subscription, hey, great. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic, because that's what we're doing. Hope to see you in Vegas. Give a rating and review of the show wherever you listen to it. Tell your friends. That's it. That's all. John Carroll, take us away.
Sunlight, you gotta stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. Stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change would begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. While you lying awake wondering where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide.